Hi, I am Dominic Catute, and for my directing final, I am talking about The Christians by Lucas Noth. I decided for this video presentation to be on camera, speaking to a camera, because this play is so rooted in talking to an audience that I thought it was only fitting to make that parallel. The Christians is a play that takes place within a church that's very important to the story, not just because it's a play about Christians, but because it's a play about the people in the church and these people that are not just their Christian faith. It's described in the author's note that it takes place in a big church with a choir and a pulpit to preach at, but that's not described as the setting, that's described as the how, which I think is a very interesting distinction because it shows that's how this story is being chosen to be told in this church with these Christian people, with these Christian elements. In actuality, this play is about a lot of things and how these problems the congregation face connect to real things that everyone faces. Predominantly, in my production that I'm choosing to focus on, is the theme of judgment and how that judgment creates distance between people and how paradoxical the nature between judgment and choosing to be non-judgmental can be. The play begins in the church in a Sunday Mass, and we're immediately introduced to our protagonist, Pastor Paul. Pastor Paul is a smooth speaker. He's very charismatic, and he cares about the church very deeply. And again, smooth speaker, and he is very good at controlling the audience. In fact, he talks to the audience in his sermons and throughout the play, narrating what happens. But on this day, he's giving a sermon, which begins with a sort of celebration, talking about how the debt the church was in for expanding it has been paid off. But despite all those debts being paid and all the renovations being finalized, there's still a crack within the church, not architecturally, but with its people. And that is in the congregation's belief in hell. He had heard a story from other pastors about a young boy who lived in an area without many Christian churches, so he was not Christian himself. Unfortunately, he died in a fire trying to save his sister, and one of the pastors said it's such a shame that he died before he could be Christian because that means he went to hell. And this really sits with Pastor Paul, and he mulls it over and talks to God, as he puts it, and he decides it's time for a radical change, that their church will no longer believe in being Christian is how you get to heaven. All people under Christ go to heaven. And this leads to another point he makes, that judging others for not being Christian only makes them not want to be Christian more. And if they want to love thy neighbor, as the Bible puts it, this judgment of others different from them needs to stop, because that's not bringing people to the church. That's only creating, as he puts it, an insurmountable distance. So, with that, he's saying that all go to heaven, and that judging people for not being Christian isn't necessary because no matter who you are, you're going to go to heaven, even if you're not Christian. This immediately ruffles feathers, predominantly with the antagonist of our play, Joshua, Associate Pastor Joshua, who, after leading a prayer, speaks out and says that he is having trouble understanding why Paul would say this, because they are a church that believes in hell. He is very traditional, where Paul is advocating for change. Joshua wants to keep things the same because he believes that is what the Christian faith means. And Paul dodges a lot of Joshua's counterpoints, Joshua quoting the Bible and Paul twisting those words and being like, well, that doesn't mean this, and he finds all the plot holes. And the two feud and bicker, leading with a moment where Paul is like, so if you were God, are you saying you would send that boy who died in a fire trying to save his sinner, who tried to save his sister, whose life was cut so short, you're saying he would go to hell? And Joshua says, I would have no choice but to. This leads to a vote being taken, and it comes out that 50 people agree with Joshua and how this is where they believe Christianity lies, and the thousands of other people still believe with Paul, leading to this outvoting, meaning that Joshua leaves the church. And this seems like a great victory for Paul. However, we immediately, starting to see the themes of how judgment and distance collide and are paradoxical. While Paul wants to be a person who is non-judgmental towards anyone and is welcome and opening to anyone, he kicks someone out of his church. And this is brought up in the next scene with Elder J, part of the church board. He says, while he does support Paul and thinks he's leading the church in a great direction, he's sad what he did to Joshua, because Joshua is such a hard worker and he brought a lot of people to the church. Paul twists this and goes, well, if you're worried about money, that's your problem, not mine. I'm trying to lead the church in a unified way. And if people do not agree with me, that is what will cause this church to crumble. And we see later that's not the case. But nevertheless, Elder J is a little sad about this and brings up this hyperbole in Paul. In the next scene, part of the choir, congregate member Jenny, speaks out during Mass towards Paul and says, while I have nothing but love in my heart for you, your church has been a family to me and helped me through so many tough times, I'm having difficulty understanding how, if you are still a sinner, you can go to heaven. And this leads to the iconic line she has asking, is Hitler in heaven? Which Paul has to say yes to. He is so stubborn in his beliefs, even if he doesn't agree with it. It's written very hesitantly in saying when he says this, but he says yes, and he also says that if someone killed her son, he would also get to go to heaven. It shows that while he bashed Joshua for being stubborn and not being able to move forward, he himself is being stubborn and unwavering in his beliefs, and this causes Jenny to leave and other congregate members to stop coming to church as well. We're finally formally introduced to Paul's wife, Elizabeth. We've seen throughout the show behind Paul in sermon and Mass. In the first sermon Paul gives, he tells a very sweet, loving story about how they met on an airplane and the distance between themselves was insurmountable, but he still reached forward to make that connection because she was just so beautiful and he was so drawn to her. So up until this point, she's been a very positive, almost trophy in his life. Something that is stable that he can hold on to, but there's a lot of turmoil with Elizabeth as she finds it frustrating that Paul is taking the church in this direction. Paul wants to have Elizabeth support him more and in her women's Bible study group preach what he's preaching more, but she confesses that she doesn't agree at all, that she believes in hell, and that she voted for Joshua in that initial vote, and that she's scared that Paul would hide this from her, that she doesn't know who he's become, and that she's scared that he'll keep doing this and dragging her along with him until the point that she won't be able to recognize herself. And she just feels like he's pushing her away and creating distance and not thinking about the other people in his life, like his daughter and her. The scene ends with her saying, I love you, but I wish I didn't. After these three scenes, one with Elder J and Jenny and Elizabeth, the church we see is dilapidating and falling apart, unable to pay for the bills, and Paul is still struggling to hold it together and still steadfast in his belief that what he's doing is for the church and others. This leads to a confrontation between Joshua and Paul, where Joshua reveals to Paul that the board of elders want to replace Paul with him because Joshua has started his own church, which is doing really well. It's not as prestigious, perhaps, as Paul's, he says, but it gets the job done. The two butt heads and bicker, with Paul claiming that Joshua chooses to believe in hell, but Joshua kind of flips it on him, saying that he's the one painting him as the villain, and that his motto of no judgment is backfiring on him because Paul's congregation is also now believing this, that he's some evil man who believes in cartoon devils and that everything is terrible. And something that Joshua says is that it's not easy for him to believe in hell, but he has seen it. He then tells Paul about the story about how when his mother was dying on her deathbed, she was not Christian, and she refused to be Christian despite him praying and pleading with her to be so, but she wouldn't give in. And so when she died in agony, and he saw her, reach out to him, and he claims he sees hell in her eyes as in her last moments. But Joshua doesn't want to believe in hell, and so he pleads to Paul, saying, I want you to show me that there is no hell, and I will back you, and I will preach alongside you. But unfortunately, Paul's exact words, and this is the climax, states that he cannot show Joshua the absence of nothing, conceding that maybe he can't have everyone agree with him, and perhaps he was creating a lot of distance. He finally lets in that Joshua is different. This leads to the denouement of the play, where Joshua refuses the offer and continues his own church. Paul is wrought with existentialism, wondering if what he believes truly is his thoughts, or if they were the words of God, or if they were placed there by how he was raised and the events that led up to that. But now his church is empty, and his wife is preparing to leave him with her bags packed. He tries once again to woo her with his line that he said or wrote to her those many years ago, 22 years ago, that he feels a strong urge to communicate with her, but the distance is insurmountable. And that is true, as Elizabeth has no words to say to Paul, and the play ends with Paul pleading to her and her leaving him in silence. I'm really drawn to this play for a lot of reasons, technically and personally. On a technical level, what I love about this play is that it is a great modern and contemporary example of the Greek tragedy, Greek hero plotline. In those Greek tragedies, Aristotle claimed and discovered that what makes a great tragic hero is that they are of high power and high status and want to do good and have good intentions, but because of some human flaw, some hamartia, they cause problems, either their stubbornness or their ignorance or their unwillingness to change. And those are all traits that Paul exhibits, because he is human, despite wanting to come off as higher and holier than thou and preaching to a congregation in the show and to the audience. Everything he says kind of blows up in his face, and he does mean well. He does mean it to help the church, but in the end it causes his downfall, and I find that arc that he goes through very interesting. Another element I love about the show is how integral the audience is to it, and how that line between this being a church and this being a play is really played with. Like I mentioned, this play takes place entirely in a church. Paul delivers sermons to the audience as if they were an actual congregation, and they're playing with that distance, with him talking to the audience and being in a church that never changes, and these things happening around him in an unorthodox way. And I think that's really interesting. A lot of my favorite shows, or TV shows as well, like Fleabag, have moments like that where the character wants to be connected and come off holier than thou, but and they talk to the audience, but they're only furthering the divide and the distance. It's very Brechtian in that sense. And on a personal level, one of the reasons that I love about the show, or one of the things I love about the show, is its themes of an afterlife. I am not Christian myself, but I don't think you really need to be. Like I said, all the elements of this show are so deeply human, and the Christian religion is really a way to explore those themes. And one of the themes that resonates with me, like I mentioned just now, is the theme of death and an afterlife. I'm quite afraid of what happens after death, and it's fun to see how the characters in this world choose and are raised and picked to believe what happens after death, with Paul believing that everything will be fine and that everyone will go to heaven, juxtaposed against Joshua, who believes in a hell and believes in a heaven and is very strict in that. So I think that is fun. There's also elements in the story of power and how power is used to oppress and change and move people. I think we live in a time politically where the Bible and religion is used sort of as a weapon to make people feel bad and suppress people. So I think, especially right now, a production of The Christians would be very resonant and really reflect what's happening in the news and in our government and stuff. And then another element in the story, like I mentioned, is judgment, which I really resonated with, especially as a young person. I think we live in an era where it's easier than ever to see people either through the internet or media and instant chats and stuff, and things go viral and are put on the internet forever. And while, the internet is nothing really ever brought up in this play, I think how judgment builds and grows like a wildfire is something that happens all the time nowadays. And I think young people especially need to learn that even the smallest bit of gossip can just really grow and explode, and that being, or just saying, that you don't judge people, it's not just about that. You really need to practice what you preach. Moreover, this play is also one that leaves you feeling very empathetic towards the human condition. Like I said, all these characters are very deeply human, and I think audience members will get a lot from that. They'll feel uncomfortable with Paul's actions, but perhaps see why he did this. They'll be sympathetic towards Elizabeth, but also be sad that she's not willing to give Paul another chance. Or Joshua, who starts the play as a very stout and stubborn antagonist. By the end, you see why he believes these things. And I think that those contradictions and those conflictions are so invigorating for an audience member, and that's another thing I love about this play. Lastly, I want to talk about my sets. One of the things I also love about The Christians is how surreal it is that it all takes place within this church. I think there's a lot of room to explore how weird that is, and I drew up my set on a piece of paper. I would like this whole play to take place within the church. So we have the pulpit in the middle, we have the chairs where the board and other key members of the church stay, we have the cross, the projections, the choir. It's all there to make the illusion that this theater that you are in is actually a church. I would set this in a proscenium because most churches are built like a proscenium, but also I think prosceniums provide the most distance between an audience. A thrust is all about engaging an audience and having them be part of it. A thrust, they are just looking straight at it. And I would have things come on to the set and be taken off the set, like the bed for Elizabeth's scene, for instance. She would just already be in that and come on. And I kind of want, I think, Paul to always be in this pulpit or near this pulpit to showcase how stubborn he is in what he's preaching and the message he's trying to get across. Another reason why I have these chairs here and the choir surrounding the central action of what Paul is doing or who he's talking to is to provide that feeling of judgment, that someone is always watching or ridiculing or looking at you. And even as the church diminishes and its members and board members leave and choir members and congregate members leave, there's still always going to be that audience looking and judging these very deeply human characters. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening.